Families raising children with disabilities face a variety of challenges and complexities in financial planning. Developing the right strategies now can ensure that loved ones have the assistance they will need in every aspect of their life. EP's annual financial planning issue offers practical advice and valuable resources to help overcome these challenges. To read more, sign up for
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of REITs Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every REIT you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to REITsAcrossAmerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's REITsAcrossAmerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention.
Suicide is complex. There is no single cause.
And it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military.
Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not.
If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available.
There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis.
Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay.
Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on hubazoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes of Reapers Detailing and Power Washing, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company and Exceptional Parent Magazine. Thank you both. I think this is a first for Oscar Mike Radio. I think so. I've had parents on before. I don't think I've ever had a parent quite like this one who you could argue, I think Chesty would probably approve of her being an honorary Marine because she has not one, but two sons in the Marine Corps. So she's like doubly awesome. And she has a very cool show called Conversations with a Vet. I've been on it, and I cannot wait to introduce you to and talk with Carolee Hagstrom. Carolee, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio. Thank you so much.
Well, hello, Travis. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
It's great. We're going to talk some parenting. We're going to talk some Marine Corps. We're going to talk some, experiences and all that good stuff. And then you got this show and I was on it. What a cool time that was.
Thank you. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Apart from me choking, it was great.
You were laughing so much. You just couldn't contain yourself.
I couldn't. And I'm still waiting for those socks, by the way.
Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. We'll get into that. Absolutely. I'm glad you didn't forget.
No, I'm a mom. I have a steel trap up here.
Yeah, I mean, every time I think I can get one over on a mom, I'm reminded real quick. You remember, how did you remember that?
You thought I was dying, right?
Like, she'll just forget all about that now that the show's over. But so, I'm on her show. I had a great time. She's talking with me. She's digging into the gray matter that's Travis, and she starts coughing, and she has to go off screen. We're doing this, and she's like, "Well, what'd you think about when?" Well, I was doing all that. So I was thinking about the Oscar Mike Radio, like, supply drop gift pack. The Navy says you need water, socks, and Motrin. So I'd have like some fake Motrin, some OMR socks, and some, branded water. And if I listen to what's not being said, she's telling me to get after it.
That's right.
So anyway, you're here now. You're on the other side of the microphone. Like, I'm talking to you now.
I
And
know.
how do you feel about that?
It's different. I almost feel like I have to watch my P's and Q's because it's not my show and I don't want to embarrass you.
I don't know. I mean, watching you turn red on
I
international
know.
air, I mean, I'm not embarrassed. I mean, there's not much I haven't seen. So just relax, listen to the sound of my voice, and let's have a good time.
Your voice is very, very soothing, must
Oh,
say. Yes.
thank you. Thank you. Where in the US did you grow up from? Because is it the South with Carolee, or was it somewhere else? Talk to me about that.
So
Because I got it wrong, people. I was calling her Carol, and she's like, my name is Carolee. I'm like, oh, I thought you were like true Southern, but maybe you're not. I don't know.
but to be fair, I waited till the end of the show to correct him.
Like,
I did again, I didn't want to I truly believe you don't berate people in front of others.
well, you didn't berate me. She's like, my name's not Carol, it's Carolee. I'm like, oh, well, if I had known that, I would have.
I know.
I would have done it sooner.
That's okay. I get it a lot. I get called that and Karen and uh, Christy and I don't know. Like half of them just don't even hear the name. They forget it 30 seconds later.
Well, I'm glad I didn't do that. So, at least I was somewhat close. But where does Carolee hail from in terms of her American experience?
So I am Jewish. And for those of you who do, well, Jewish descent. So I guess I should say that. Raised in Nevada. And my aunt, I had an aunt, Carolee, and she died at an early age. So what happens is in the Jewish tradition, if a female is born, you're named after a deceased female. And if a male is born, you're named after a deceased male. So you could have the same name in several generations because if I can't even think of any names off the top of my head, but let's say Leonard, and then Leonard dies, and then the next male that's born gets named Leonard, and then that Leonard dies. Well, the next born name, you see. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So, but yes, so that's
I don't recall that being in the Bible, Carolee.
Well, we got to go back into the old.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that it is in the Bible, truthfully.
I don't recall, but okay.
I think it's just tradition, right? Like Fiddler on the Roof kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was saying the same thing. Like, it's tradition.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And you have to respect tradition. So it's a lot like, which probably, I don't know if it's in the Bible or not, but it's a lot like, in the Jewish tradition, you don't have beef and dairy on the same plate or served at this, and you specifically do not even use the same utensils that you would use for beef that you would use for dairy. I know.
Man, with me, Carolee, it's as fast as in the input system as possible.
Yes.
Eat it now, taste it later. I don't care how it gets there.
Right. It all comes out the same. But I sure am not Orthodox. I'm really not a religious individual. Just I say that I am Jewish because really that's where the name came from.
Yeah.
My Jewish aunt, and yeah, so she had postpartum depression after her child was born, and unfortunately, she ended up when she was around 30 or something, I think, drowning in the bathtub. Yeah.
You're carrying it on into your own journey into motherhood. And, I've watched my children come into the world, which was a very I've never forgotten. And all three were different. There were three very different deliveries and births. And it's just a really intense feeling, like this thing, this mass of flesh that's kind of just sitting there right now, becomes this person. And, I start there for a reason, and we're going to get into it later, but, we hold these babies and then we watch them grow up. I mean, what was it like? And then as a bonus, you're a boy mom.
Yeah. Whoa. Yay. Yes, I am. 100. Even the dogs are boys.
Outnumbered, fully outnumbered.
100%.
One reason I say that is because my brother has daughters. And one time, they came up to me and said, Uncle Travis, we want you to tell us how you feel. Like, what is this? We grunt at each other. Like, my sons can grunt their, Domino's order to me, and I fully understand. It's really kind of weird, but it works. Whereas it seems like daughters really want to get into the nitty gritty and the drama and tell you what's going on. And I'm like, man, I'm not used to that. So
Yes.
you had boys for sons, boys for pets. You're married to a dude, obviously. I mean, you're solo. I mean, do you ever feel like I need to be around other women just to feel normal?
I so do. I so do. But I have a story
Okay.
to go along with this. So, back in my early years, I was told by doctors I would never be able to have children. And I was married once before. After that divorce, I dated, had a fiance, all that stuff, and never once got pregnant. Was told again I would never be able to have kids. So when I met my husband, we had that conversation, after dating for a little bit. And it was like, he made comment about children. And I said, well, I hate to burst your bubble, but I was told I can't ever have children. And he was fine with that. He's like, we can adopt. And I was like, excellent. Yeah, 3 months later, I was pregnant.
I hear that happens. Like,
yeah.
it just happens once you decide to adopt, or someone adopts a child and then all of a sudden they can have kids. It's like,
yeah,
maybe the body just really relaxes. I don't know.
well, for me, it was a lot more than that. There was a lot of scar tissue,
Oh, wow.
endometriosis, just a lot of things happening. So again, it was just one of those. So when I found out I was pregnant, I I call my mom, and I had not told my husband yet. So I called my mom. I know. Well, he was working, so he wasn't home yet. And I wanted to tell him face to face. And my mom didn't believe me, that I was, that I took a little test, and on a stick, and that I was pregnant. So she comes over, she grabs me, takes me to the clinic for blood work. And only then, when it came back positive, did she believe me, because she knew I, had told her that the doctors had said I would never be able to have kids of my own. So I'm all prepared and to tell my husband that night. And, he calls and he's like, yeah, I'm going to go out with the guys after work, have a few drinks. And I'm like, okay, okay, I'll tell him. Well, then he comes home and he's kind of not, in the right frame of mind. And I'm just, by this time it's like hormones. It's like you're fine until you find out you're pregnant, right? And then it's like excuses for these hormones to just go. So,
That's
so
what it was. Okay. All right.
yes. And so, I roll over and I'm crying, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Nothing." He's like, "No, something's wrong. What's wrong?" "I was gonna tell you I was pregnant, but you." I mean, it just, oh yeah, it was horrible. So anyway, uh, he actually was born, he was born a week late. And the interesting thing, they do this APGAR test for babies. And, that's for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with what that is. They're checking the color of their skin and, their reflexes and heart rate and so on and so forth. And this whole thing initially, I don't do needles well at all, like at all. And
Preach, sister, preach.
oh, I hate them. And when I first went in, after I'd found out I was pregnant, and I wanted to make sure, because of the Jewish descent, that I did not have a specific gene. And so, because that gene, it's possible too that my husband's family might have some Jewish heritage as well. And if he carries that gene and I carry that gene, our child would end up with what's called Tay-Sachs.
Wow.
And they would not live past the age, I think the longest living ever was 5 years, but primarily they pass within the first year. And it's excruciating pain for them. So anyway, well, I'm sitting there and another lady comes in. She sits down in another chair waiting for the technician. This technician goes to draw blood, and she hits a nerve. And my husband at that time, we're not married just yet, but he's holding my right hand, and she's taking blood out of my left arm. And she hit that nerve, and I come up like this. And thankfully he had my hand and kept me from punching her. But I screamed, and the lady who came in and sat down got up and walked out.
How do you hit a nerve, Carolee?
I apparently have a nerve that runs right over the top of my vein here on my left arm.
I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. It was horrible. But anyway, I digress. So I go in, we live at that point, we lived like 50 miles away from the hospital. So we went to the hospital, and we were going to stay overnight at the hospital and be induced the following morning. And that night I go into labor. So here comes the delivery nurse. She's been doing this for eons, and she puts this IV in my arm, and every time I move, it's like digging into me. And she's like, and so then she's put it in my hand, right? So every time I go to move, it's like, again, digs into my hand, and I'm like, this hurts. And I had told her, if I ask for drugs, I want you to wait 10 minutes before you go get them, because I prefer not to have drugs when I have this kid. That's the preference. Okay. And at least then if she goes to get it, odds are the kid would be born. So anyway, she tells me, well, I've been doing this for so long, and the way you are with needles, I just don't see this happening, me going without drugs. And it pissed me off. I don't know how else to put it. So here comes this kid, and he was already halfway out, and I'm like, I need drugs. And so they came back, and it was like, I don't know, 5 micrograms of fentanyl, something really minute. And, but by this point, I mean, he was already pretty much out. So, yeah, he was, I would say, easy, as far as that goes. Great child to raise until he started teething, but he would sleep 11 hours straight. I remember the first time I woke up at the first night I had him home. I woke up and I was going to wake him up to feed him. And then I'm like, what am I doing? This is stupid. I'm not going to train him to get up every 3 hours just to feed him if he is sleeping comfortably. So yeah, never had an issue.
Let me ask you this. It's my understanding that a lot of women, once the baby is out, or they hold the baby for the first time, all the pain, suffering goes away.
Yes.
It's almost like you all forget it. That's really true.
Yes. And I think it's actually a human response. It's not something specific to just women. You think of the most hurtful thing that has ever happened in your lifetime, as far as physical pain, right? You think it was painful, but can you actually still feel it?
No.
Exactly. So we know it was painful because I remember I was screaming and, and at that stage, my mom had driven all the way to the hospital, but she gets a call. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. And she was staying at my brother's house there, near the hospital. And so she gets this call at 3 o'clock in the morning. So she gets there. And I was like, "You look really tired, Mom." And she goes, "Yeah, I took half a sleeping pill and then you called." So she's like up by my head. She's about ready to pass out. And I'm like, "Please have her go sit down and put her head between her knees." She's going to faint. Yeah. And then my youngest, 25 days, or excuse me, 25 months to the day apart. And he was different. They actually did have to induce, but I didn't have any pain medication, no epidural, none of that. But come to find out, I actually had kidney stones while I was pregnant with him. And it wasn't until 3 weeks afterwards that they finally went in and blew him up because they were too big to pass.
Wow.
But I kept thinking he was stuck on my hip as I was delivering him. It's like I kept saying, he's stuck, and they're just ignoring me. And then, I do have one more thing. So my oldest Marine was actually adopted.
Okay.
And my husband and I adopted him. He was 25 years old.
Oh, very nice.
In a court of law, legally adopted him. And so here he was already grown when he came into our family. So he is our oldest baby.
All right. Well, adoption's a great thing, and I wish more people did it or could do it. So I'm glad that worked out. But regardless, how did both? Because sometimes us boys, especially, will say, "You know what, we're gonna do? We'll coordinate stressing mom out."
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Because they do a good job up there, let me tell you.
We might fight like cats and dogs, but when it's time to, figure out how we're going to get one over on mom, we will come together, right? And it just smells like that maybe, one of them got the idea, talked about with the other one, and like, you know what? We'll both do it. Because, mom will be fine, right? We'll both be gone. What was that like when you got told that, yeah, mom joined the Marine Corps, Mom?
Well, thankfully, our adopted son he actually, when we met him, he was Army National Guard, and he had been deployed twice to Afghanistan as route clearance. And then he was home on leave, and he happened to come over with a friend to our house. And that's how we met him. And we stayed up all night till 6 a.m. talking, and just loved him, loved his personality. And we all had to, so my husband and I, we both had to go to work that morning. So anyway, he did a great job in that regard. And then he decided, while he was home for leave, he was actually going to go and transfer into the Marine Corps.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So we had him already starting to go through, of course, he had to go through boot camp. And as my middle son is getting older, he actually had wanted to be a Navy SEAL. That was his goal in life. And what had happened was, especially after seeing, the movie and everything about Chris Kyle, but what happened was, it was his senior year, my middle son's senior year, and the Marine Corps happened to be at a football game that we were at. Well, just prior to that was in what 2021, August of 2021 would have been the 13 men and women service members that died in Abbey Gate in Kabul, Afghanistan. That was our oldest Marines unit. And so he actually was with the 2-1 unit out of Camp Pendleton in California. And he'd been married for about 3 months, found out that his wife had stage 4 cancer. So he had the opportunity to either stay home with her or deploy with his unit. So of course he stayed. And then they got detoured. They were on their way to Japan, or they were in Japan, but detoured at some point there to Kabul. And when he heard the news, he was broken, because he had served with, he had trained with, or trained, literally trained a lot of these people. And so at that point, when our middle son had seen the Marines at the football game, he had told them, I do want to go into the Navy. So the recruiter said, well, come down to the office and we'll get the Navy recruiter over here. So he's like, okay. So next day or two, he goes over there, and the Marine recruiter calls 2 doors down or 1 door down and says, hey, we've got somebody here who wants, to join the Navy. And the guy says, I don't have time to talk to him. And that was the end of that. So my son's like, okay, I guess I'm going Marine Corps. And that's where he went.
But still, it hits different, right? I mean,
it does.
You go through childbirth, feeling them sleep on you, and it's a really comforting thing, right? And their first steps, they're crawling, walking, the first words they say, all that stuff. I'm sure you remember the first time they got in trouble, or right. You remember all that stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, mom, I'm going to be a Marine. And it can't be, maybe you were proud, maybe you weren't, but there has to be some like, wait a minute, this is not what I forecast. Like, how do moms process that?
It's never easy. Here's the thing I'm going to tell you, and you're going to think this crazy, but my grandmother we had moved her, my husband and I, to Montana, and for better life, etc. Anyway, we're sitting around the table one day, and she's very into astronomy and Mercury and retrograde and so on and so forth. And she said that she had been reading some article, and that the generation that I've just birthed, right, are what they call the warrior generation, and that there will be a major war, and that those children, my children, will be in this war, and that they will, when the war ends, we will have 100-year peace. Now, my kids are very little at that time, and I really did have a hard time with that. But I was able to have my oldest Marine that I'd adopted, seeing how he was dealing with it. And, he'd seen his own share of things in Afghanistan the first go round when he was deployed with the Army National Guard. And he just, he was there. I knew that he would be there for his older little brother, right? I don't even know how to put that, but so I was very proud of him deciding to join the military. And then I kind of felt like the oldest would watch out for the other once he was in. So, and as it turned out, he did. But yeah, it's really disconcerting though, because when they're first born, here we are primarily in, a time of peace. So, you just didn't hear much happening out there. So yeah, there were deployments, but things like Japan and so on. I mean, pretty easy where they're just training. So, but yeah, it's a difficult thing because you worry, especially when you don't hear from them. And being boys, it's a lot of, yeah, well, I'll be out of pocket for about a week, and then I'll call you when I get back. And I'm like, great. So I'm like checking off the days on the calendar, and a week passes, and then a week and a half passes, and you're like, something's happened. That mom mind is like, what is happening? Why? Something had to have happened. He is somewhere, he is injured. He is laid up. I don't know what, don't know what's going on, but our mind just goes to the worst scenarios ever. And yeah, I was one of those helicopter parents, just so you know. But I've seen a lot in my life, so I think that doesn't help any.
Are they both serving now?
They are both separated from the Marine Corps now.
Okay.
Actually, both of them this year. So the oldest was, I think, total service, I think he had around 16 years in. And then the middle Marine, youngest Marine, I guess, he had just hit 2 years of service. Unfortunately, he was stuck in medical right after he graduated boot camp and was in holding for MCT. So, or I don't know, what's the other one?
It's Marine Combat Training. Well,
Yeah,
it's a crucible now. It's a crucible.
Yeah,
now.
so he got his Eagle Globe and Anchor, so he made it to a Marine. He just hadn't hit the fleet. He was in holding, waiting for that combat training because he went 0311. And that was the other thing too, is his ASVAB was really high. And he says, I want to go infantry. And his recruiter said pretty much F you is what they told him.
Well, mine did the same thing. I got a really good ASVAB score. I'm like, I think I'd like to be a machine gunner. He's like, no. But no, I wasn't given a choice. I was, but I wasn't. So I get that. But so they went in and they served for 4 years, 8 years, somewhere in between.
So my youngest Marine, his contract was 4 years, but he was, after he graduated boot camp, he had his 10-day leave and went back within a week of sitting there and holding, waiting to get picked up with a company and so on. He ended up with an adverse reaction to the COVID shot. And so he ended up with Bell's palsy. And that hung around for roughly 6 months. They let him stay in holding MCT for a bit, like in Iraq with others that were still waiting to join the fleet, or a training company. But after they realized, it's taking too long for you to heal that, because in addition to Bell's palsy, he ended up getting what's called trigeminal neuralgia. And so it's a nerve thing. And so you've got two nerves, the 7th and 8th cranial nerve on each side. And when he would stress out, when it was cold, when wind was blowing on him, it would be excruciatingly painful. And that term it was called suicide disease back in the 1800s. And the reason was because the pain was greater than, and I'm quoting, childbirth and amputation. And so they eventually moved him to Lima Company, which is the Marine Corps' medical. And it was hell. It was hell, not just for him as a newly minted Marine, but also for this mom, because he would call me in tears, telling me that here he is. He's in so much pain. He cannot walk because he's on the max dosage of gabapentin a day. And so he can no longer walk. It's caused so much dizziness. He has to be buddy carried everywhere he goes. He is pretty much confined to his rack. So his muscles atrophy. He loses at least a solid 30 pounds, and he wasn't very big to begin with. And the whole time, the staff sergeant, the first sergeant, the gunny that are all overseeing medical are telling him he is a liar and a faker.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was ugly. It was really ugly.
Yeah, I never liked the whole mandatory COVID shot, and yours is not the only story. And that certainly, changed the arc of his life. And you're
It
having
did.
to watch all that. And this is where, I kind of want to dig into. You are the mom. You
Mhm.
know your son.
Right.
You know his brother. And you're having to watch this. And, you know, later you find out that a lot of recruiters will sit in front of the parents, and the moms remember this, that, hey, we'll take care of your son. He's going to be okay. We're going to take care of him. We're the Marine Corps. And so they're like, okay, you can do this. Mom doesn't like it, but we can do it.
Right.
And then it had to be some like, because it's not like he got hurt training or in combat. It was the jab in the
Right.
vernacular, and you must have been powerless to help.
100%. But I do have to say, I give the biggest kudos to his recruiter and
Oh,
recruiter's
really?
office. And here's the thing, having an older brother that's in the Marine Corps. So the deal was, when we got to the recruiter's office so that the recruiters could talk to the parents, the older Marine wanted to be on a phone call. He wanted to hear everything because he's like, I don't want you getting screwed. So what he told him. So he didn't care that it was a gunny sitting across from us having this conversation. And here he is, a sergeant. It was just, or no, I don't even think at that point he was a sergeant. I can't even remember. I think he was
Still
lower
a
than that,
corporal.
maybe. And he was just, he did not mince words. And he's like, and then we get off the phone, and he says, he calls us and he says, yeah, the guy's legit. So, and then once our youngest Marine was in the medical, they would still call him and talk to him and check on him and make sure he was okay mentally and physically. And although there wasn't much they could do, they'd give advice here and there, right? Things about mast and so on and so forth. So that helped. And they were there for us. They were there for me because I would talk to them a lot. And just because they every so often they would call us and say, hey, haven't heard from Grant. I sent him a message however long ago and I hadn't heard back. How's he doing? So it was a lot of that. They would check in and we'd tell them what's going on or whatever. But they always felt, and they have said this to my face, that they are, in their minds, once they get that EGA, whether they hit the fleet or not, they are still a Marine.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. And people have asked that before. It's like once you complete boot camp, and I said, I went to boot camp in San Diego, and the lore is once you go up the Reaper, you're a Marine. But no, you're a Marine when you get your EGA
You are.
that day, whether you go in the fleet or not. And people ask me why. I said, because I said, you don't understand. I mean, you can literally get out of boot camp and get hurt on leave, or come to MCT if you're not a O3 or infantry school, get hurt within the first week and get med boarded out. I mean, it happens all the time. And so, if you have that EGA and you didn't go to the fleet, you still earn the title. It wasn't given to you. So in my mind, your son is a Marine, and the full rights and privileges of a brother Marine. Absolutely. So let's just put that to bed, please. because it's really unfortunate when people say, well, you didn't serve in the fleet, so you're not Marine enough. No,
Right.
no, you did what you had to do. Is he convalescing now? Is he getting better, or how's that working out,
He
Carolee?
actually is getting a little bit better. So while he was in, after a year of being on this toxic gabapentin, um, he finally got to go see a Navy neurologist who actually decided to read his chart.
Wow.
Imagine that. I know. And he stepped in and I was like, you be sure you tell this doctor such and such and such and such and such, right? I mean, this is mom mode, right? Because this kid would forget what he had for breakfast every day. And, I mean, that's him. So, I'm reminding him, make sure you tell him this, this, and this. And so he calls me afterwards and he's like, Mom, guess what? She actually diagnosed me. And I was like, oh, okay. And what did she say? And he goes, what you said it was. And I said, oh, and that is, and he goes, trigeminal neuralgia. I said, well, is it because you told her about this? And he goes, no. He says, she actually read my chart before I came in.
But that's scary in a way. How long did your son suffer because people didn't actually read what was right in front of them?
2 years. 2 years. I can tell you this. And at some point, I want to start an advocacy group for all military service members that are in medical for all branches. Because the stories, as a Marine mom, I see a lot of mom posts or, what have you, groups for Marine moms. And the stories that are being told are through the roof. Things that happen in medical should never happen. I mean, my son's a prime example, but, he's getting calls from others saying, guess what they're trying to do now? Guess, and he had a rack mate in medical who had a TBI and was stuck there for 3 years. 3 years.
That is just a load, man. You're not getting to go home. You're not getting to have family.
Yeah.
It's a very lonely existence. Is this where you started coming up with the idea for conversation with a vet?
It is. I knew that my oldest Marine he was kind of thrown around the idea of getting out and had been for a couple of years. And he'd recently remarried and so he was commuting every weekend, several hundred miles. And I think he just was ready to be done. And I knew, I've heard some of the stories that he told about being in Afghanistan, friends that he'd lost, things that he'd seen, and then how he felt the Marine Corps was kind of, I don't know, the whole idea with his little brother, how all these checks and balances that he kept saying, Mom, you got to understand there's checks and balances, he'll be taken care of. It's going to be okay. And so on and so forth. And he found himself eating his words and he was so upset. And I think that was part of it. So, yeah.
They're out now. You're doing conversation with the vet.
Mm-hmm.
What do the conversations center around for you and your sons? I mean, is it, hey, Mom, we're going to try to get our life going again, or we're going to give you some grandkids now, or, how do you, what's you all's relationship like?
We have a good relationship. As
Yeah.
with any boys, though, our oldest, as I said, is remarried. He lives in another state. And he, it's one of those, I have to initiate the phone calls because he's a guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have my youngest Marine, a middle son, and then my youngest son, who actually did consider going into the Marine Corps, but then realized very quickly he was not adept at all that physical exercise. His words, just so you know. But the goal was, with Conversations with a Vet, was to help put in place for them some resources, because I knew, as again, that helicopter parent, I wanted to make sure that there were resources available when they were going to need them. And within a month after my oldest got out, he needed those resources. And of course, then all of the network, the veteran network that I've created for them, without a doubt, I know I can call you, Travis, and you would say, and I'd say, hey, my son needs another Marine to talk to, and here's his number, and you'd do it in a heartbeat, right?
For sure.
I mean,
for sure.
and it's finding those connections for them, and if and whenever they need them. But more importantly, it's not just for my boys, but that was the primary purpose, was to find those resources that they could use, and no matter where they went. But it's evolved, of course, into finding resources for veterans as a whole, and hearing from other veterans who have, how have they managed to get past what they believe are the limitations, so, and how are they doing, so that's made the difference.
How have you liked, you said that because of building your network and talking and conversation with a vet, is you have a list of people who you consider solid. How has conversation with a vet allowed you to have those conversations, Carolee?
I think the best thing for me is I generally will ask a veteran at the end of the show if they could refer to my channel to veterans that they know of who would be willing to come on the show. And I do that simply because I don't want to have somebody claim that they're a veteran only to find out later that they really weren't. So, it just makes it easier that way. We don't have any stolen valor. But I think veterans, as you know, they respond better hearing from other veterans. They're hearing from their peers, and that's true for my boys. So,
Do you ever have any mothers reach out to you, or some of their friends say, hey, my mom has this conversation, around conversation with a vet, talk to her? Have you ever talked to any moms?
I've talked to moms, but they have been veterans.
Okay.
But again, I am not opposed to talking with moms or dads of military kids. I'm not opposed to that.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It is important to hear how that affects us as parents.
Well, I came on your show, and I really liked how it didn't feel like a production. Like you were really interested in, what's going on behind the eyeballs, and, you kind of poked and prodded a little bit, which was very cool. And, I think we need to hear more of the mother's perspective. You give your children to this country, and you don't know if they're going to come home.
Right.
The least that can be done is to make sure that, everything is done to take care of them. And
Right.
it sounds like the ball was dropped, and not just for you. I've read horror stories from other service members who didn't want the vaccine,
Right.
and had to make a very tough choice, and they wound up in a very difficult position. As you grow conversation with a vet, do you have any idea where you're going to go with it, or is it just building relationships with people to help other people?
I'd love to say I have all the answers and have a vision for that, right? To grow. I think the biggest thing for me is helping veterans find resources and networks, because like our conversation, right? You had to find a means, something to motivate you to get you out of the house. And the same is true for millions of veterans. It is, they like to think that they're just the lonesome. Nobody understands what they're thinking. I'm a very empathetic individual, and I can tell you what you're feeling before you even open your mouth. That's the kind of individual I am. I can see it in your facial expressions and your eyes and the way that your lips are either drawn up or down, whether you make eye contact or you don't. I am one of those types of people. So I feel it. I know that sounds crazy, but I've had to understand, all of that non-verbal communication at a very young age. So,
Well, I mean, we're guys. A lot of us in the
yeah,
military are
yeah,
guys, and like I alluded to, you know, it's not our default mode to talk about our stuff a whole lot.
right.
And we can go months without talking to our buddy, and then pick up the phone and
Hmm.
talk for 5-10 minutes and be just fine. It's different for us.
Right.
And then it's did it ever drive you crazy that we don't ask for help? It's just not in our DNA either.
Yes. Yes. It absolutely, it really does. Because, if you think about it, you're lost, right? Oh, I'll figure it out. I'll just drive around for 20 minutes. I'll eventually figure it out. But yet you could spend 30 seconds to go ask for directions with the cashier inside the gas station and be on your way and there 30 minutes earlier.
It's hard. It's hard, Carolee.
It is hard to ask for help, um, because we want to think we have all the answers.
I don't know if it's that, because I don't even. It's just that whole because if I ask, it means I got a problem, and I hate thinking that I got problems.
Yeah.
It's more of a pride thing with me. I'm just being candid
Okay.
with you.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
It's like I should know what to do and how to do it, and I failed, and that's completely wrong. But that's where I come from with a lot of this stuff.
But if you can learn from your mistake, then you haven't failed.
I'm getting better at that. It's taken a while, but I'm
Yeah.
I'm 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 getting better at that.
I
So
am here for you every step of the way, because I truly believe that if, it's when you don't learn and you keep making the same mistake over and over again, obviously those are the ones you want to hit upside the head. It's the, it's the ones that actually learn from it. Then you're on the right path.
yeah, yeah. Um, we've just scratched the surface of what the whole relationship between mother, son, Marine Corps, mother and Marine Corps is. So I think I'll be having you come back on maybe for Mother's Day in
Oh, I'd
2020.
love that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. How can people connect with Conversation with the Vet and what you do, Carolee?
So you can actually go to, you can send me an email, conversationswithavet@gmail.com.
Okay.
Or you certainly can give me, well, I guess give me a call. But I think we'll hold off on the number for now. But the,
Yeah.
the email, I respond to that immediately. It pops right up on my phone. You can also go to YouTube, which is where the channel is at. And it's actually Conversations with a Vet dash TT8JB. And I know, kind of weird. And because I initially, when I did it under my own name, and I just changed my personal YouTube channel over, and it was Conversations with a Vet. And then I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to keep it separate. And so I went to do this new one, and it wouldn't let me. I had to add those little, or it added those additional letters behind it, but it's all good. So we want to have, obviously, everybody come in, join on the chats. You can certainly ask questions in the chats, and with whoever the guest is. And then also it's recorded, so you can share it with family, friends, any veterans you know of, because that's the important thing, is getting the word out about these stories, yours included.
For sure, for sure. Well, Carolee, I've had a fantastic time talking with you. It's just been really insightful as a parent, but I'm a dad, I'm not a mom, and so
Mhm.
I understand the experience is really different and real personal for a lot of reasons, obviously, for moms. So I just want to thank you for sharing so openly and candidly. I will have the links to Conversation with the Vet in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. You can go and check it out. And I'm going to keep working on those socks, Carolee. How about that?
I'd appreciate it. At a minimum, the water.
All right. All right. Deal. Deal.
Well, you guys have a great one. Thanks again, Travis, for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. As we say in Oscar Mike Radio, we're mission in flight. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Remember on it teaches our mission. We care about it, we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 for Reach Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seemed to fit in with the vows of the REAP, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, Live with Purpose, I think, it's a mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.